Hi, I'm Vera.
And I'm Floridi Spaghetti, and we like to go on cycling trips and have been doing so for over a dozen years.
In this video, we would like to share some of the memories we have on the second part of a trip we did in 2014.
Our starting point was in Brittany, but this was more of a turning point as we had already cycled from where we live in the northeast of Switzerland and crossing France from east to west, mostly negotiating a fierce headwind and more than enough rain.
The purpose of our journey to France had been to visit friends who we would then rejoin in the south of France, ultimately basking in the Mediterranean sun, which we so desperately needed.
It had taken us much longer to get here than we had thought, and that had left us with mixed feelings about the first leg of our trip.
I was a bit worried that we wouldn't have much time to spend in the sunny south, so I was a bit pushed to get going again. Our friends had offered to drive us a part of the way, as they had business they needed to get attended to on the south coast. I was keen to take up this offer, as it would save us 2 days.
And this is what I had found somewhat upsetting, as using a car hadn't really been the idea. And as the landscape rushed by from behind the windshield, I felt disappointed with myself for missing out on everything. The thing is, and this became so apparent in the moment, is that cycling along a road is so very different from travelling by car. On the one hand, there is just so much more sensual involvement when cycling, like feeling the gravitational pull from the earth, being exposed to the mood swings of the weather, and hearing all the sounds nature and humans have to offer. But on the other hand, there is much more time to digest all of these impressions. Travelling by car is like watching the big game on TV at home. Sure, it's comfy and all, but it's not like you're at the live event. Cycling is not only being one of the spectators at the game, but actually being one of the players on the field. So the experience is uncomparable. However, after getting started, I was too much too absorbed to worry about that anymore and would wait a while before coming to any conclusions.
If you remember from episode 3 of this series, we were still using maps to plan our route, simply drawing a line from A to B and trying to stay as close to that line as possible, whilst avoiding busy roads. Remember, this was pre-smartphone days for us, so we were still using old analog techniques and transporting a stack of maps. This meant that the route we took was somewhat random, as we didn't make any detours for any specific points of interest.
As you will discover as you see the slideshow, this wasn't necessary to make for a journey full of highlights. As we passed countless castles, immersed ourselves in the most serene of environments, and got awestruck from thrilling scenery. But despite cycling 1,400 kilometers on a route traversing basically the whole country, surprisingly, we didn't see any major towns.
It is quite amazing if you think about it, that you can travel such long distances in densely populated Europe without getting even close to urbanity. And in France especially, there is a vast network of small back roads that offer perfect conditions for relaxed cycling.
Our friends dropped us off at the coast, so we got a last view of the sea and left with the scent of salt in the air.
Country lanes, we joined up with part of the network of European cycle routes. These sometimes carry different names, as the Eurovelo 1 is internationally known as the Atlantic cycle route, but is called the Vélo d'Issée on this section in France. The lack of unified labels and signage makes this sometimes quite confusing when planning cycle trips.
But in this instance, it more lived up to the French title, as the next part did indeed turn out to be an odyssey, as cycling along the rough, sandy, yet rocky, rutted surface wasn't really fun at all, and not what we had been getting accustomed to in France. We haven't passed here since, and as it was over a decade ago, we can only hope that they've fixed this potentially wonderful stretch of voie verte following the river Lisac, which also serves as the canal between the cities of Nantes and Brest.
Bressuire was the first major town we hit for days. And when I say major, I mean like 20,000 inhabitants. The name was probably derived from Gaulish and means a fortress on a hill, and that is as mundane as it is fitting. In medieval times, the city was surrounded by a 700-meter-long wall, including 38 round towers and a further 8 in the inner fortification.
Now, only a tiny fraction of this once monumental structure still stands, not offering much protection to the modern castle that replaced it. Bressuire was also the starting point of an old railway line that gave us uninterrupted joy for the next 35 kilometres. The abandoned railway line ended in Parthenay, which, with a population of 10,000, was the next major town. You can see the old railway bridge, which you cannot access on a bike, unless you want to risk getting run over by a train, because the line is still in use. It crosses the Touet River, which is probably where Melusine bathed, the water fairy who created this place with an elegant wave of her magic wand. Although, to be honest, this unbelievable story is in fact an exaggeration, as she only created the citadel that watches over the settlement, or so legend has it.
The folkloristic legend of Melusine, who had herself been cursed, says that she would marry, erect a castle for her husband, and produce many offspring, as long as he didn't watch her giving birth or bathing with her children. As every Saturday, her secret identity would be exposed as her two-tailed serpent body revealed itself, making her resemble a mermaid. Melusine must have travelled a lot, as her legend is widespread in northern and western France, but also in Luxembourg, Belgium and the Netherlands. And judging by the amount of castles we just randomly passed by on this route, she must have been very promiscuous.
rare sight on camera here, as keeping things clean is not a very French thing to do, especially not in comparison to Switzerland, where statues get polished daily so that they can gleam in the sunshine.
Yeah, and also in Switzerland, the spaghetti grows on trees. Just ask Slow at the Spaghetti here, he's an expert on such things.
For a lesson in nature with Vera, who will now give us some interesting facts about this exotic animal that she was very excited about.
This is the green lizard, although I much prefer its name in German, which is emerald lizard. It is called so because the underside of the jaw turns light blue when they get randy during mating season. The main reason for my excitement was that you don't get to see this often, as they are red listed. But where we stopped here was teeming with them. So I got some pretty cool shots, like here, where I caught one eating an insect. Well, bon appetit to you. It was also really cool being able to get up close to them, as they warmed themselves in the sun. Of course, you should always leave animals at peace, and if you disturb one of these creatures, you might get bit, as they can be quite aggressive towards predators, territorial invaders, and even mates. And males biting females is part of the sexual foreplay. You can also come across such lizards missing their tails, which they can shed when being attacked, and then continue wiggling like a worm for up to 20 minutes, distracting their enemy whilst they make a quick getaway. But a quick getaway wasn't something I had on my mind, as I could have stayed here forever observing these enchanting creatures.
The stone buildings of Meymac merge seamlessly together to form an ensemble that is a sight for sore eyes. Although our eyes hadn't been soared by the scenic surroundings as we approached a delightful small town which rests in this remote part of France, it is a centre of the regional nature park called Millevaches.
Now, if you speak French, you probably think the name is because of all the bovine agriculture that's going on around in this sparsely populated region, seeing that vache translates to cow. Therefore, the name Millevaches is very misleading, as it does not imply 1,000 cows, but rather 1,000 springs, or vacuas, as the Celts called them, when they found on the moist plateau that lays in the Limousin foothills of the Massif Central.
However, we did in fact see many cows and other animals like sheep, But most impressive was the countless number of butterflies that crossed our path. In hindsight, I wonder why we didn't get any images of them. Dogs can be quite a nuisance when you're cycling, especially if they come running after you. It might be an intuitive reaction to speed up and try and outpace the vicious follower so that it can't take a bite out of your leg. But as dogs love chasing, you're usually better off stopping and allowing the canine to relax. And anyway, going uphill with all that weight attached, there was no way I could have outpaced this little guy, who wasn't vicious at all, but just wanted to playfully say hello. Now, a border collie puppy would have been a sweet companion on our journey, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I was tempted to take him along for the ride. But I walked him back to the farm he had run away from, as any responsible person should do in a similar situation. I point this out as I have heard of and seen hikers and cyclists wandering around with animals that don't belong to them, sometimes leading them astray. So if this ever happens to you, don't be stupid and take responsibility for your actions, please.
The small town of Riom in Montagnes was nothing but a small market village until 1904, when a railway was built, turning it into a tourist attraction, which is why the now derelict station hotel still emits a sense of grandeur, which is bold letters on the facade. Probably opening up at the same time the village became electrified in 1908.
That was considerably late if you think about it. The trains are still operated as a tourist attraction, just like at the start. Cycling through places like this always seems like taking a step back in time. Before we settled in for the evening, we witnessed some rare mammatus clouds, a sure sign that the following thunderstorm would be a hefty one.
major town we passed through, counting 6,500 inhabitants, which is of course not a lot, but enough to deem it a local hub of commerce and culture, even boasting a cinema. Unfortunately, the old movie poster wasn't advertising what was actually playing, but it would have been an appropriate film for our journey. Voleurs de bicyclette, called the bicycle thieves in English, or La rue di biciclette in Italian, which was the original version of this film of 1948, which is considered a classic. But thankfully, the cats were on the lookout, so we weren't the victims of any theft ourselves, giving us the chance to wander around this eye-catching town built mainly out of volcanic lava rock.
After weeks of cycling, we weren't having any difficulty getting up mountain passes and easily reached the highest elevation on our route, the Pass of the Three Sisters. After that, we had the most exhilarating of descents that seemed never ending. This snapshot was taken in the AM, and it was downhill for the rest of the day from there on, descending over 1,200 meters spread out over 80 kilometers. Later that day, we would even top 77 kilometers an hour, the fastest speed we had ever reached and a record that still holds to this day. We might have gotten even faster, but 77 is an incredible, almost frightening speed on a bike. So, feeling rather overwhelmed, I pulled the brakes, but I was astonished how stable the bike felt even at these speeds, as if on rails. This was the result of the good weight distribution and low center of gravity, as all the heavy stuff was packed into the front panniers.
Saw the third episode of our videos, you might remember that we had crossed the Cheissoux a year earlier. But this time, we chose the route leading us down the canyon. So we had new things to see on the last day of this second part of our journey. With perfect weather and stunning surroundings, we had been in good spirits, feeling like we were on the last stretch of the Tour de France before passing the finishing line.
And it felt like we were radiating this aura, especially as a young guy who had been camping with a group of friends near the river approached the side of the road, stretching out his arm and holding a cup in his hand. so I could grab it passing by in real racing style manner. This really made me laugh. It had almost seemed uncanny, as if he had expected us and it had all been orchestrated. I looked into the cup. The yellowish coloured liquid looked like fruit juice, promising a welcoming start to the day, as we hadn't had the chance to get any breakfast yet. But it was only after I emptied the cup in one great big gulp that I realised that this wasn't fruit juice at all, but pastis, the popular French hard liquor, over 40% proof and full of sugar. What a great thing for someone who hardly ever drinks any alcohol on an empty stomach. I wound up feeling pretty dizzy and somewhat offset for the rest of the morning.
And then we had to make it up our last mountain pass before arriving at our final destination. As Daddy was still drunk from the pasties, and I was feeling rather tired after this really intense trip and started to long for recovery time, the measly 371 meters felt more like 3,710 meters as we finally made it to the top.
After all this cycling, we were happy to rejoin our friends we had parted from in Brittany, where we had left. We had arrived sooner than they had expected, with the exception of the young son, who had wondered what had taken us so long, as they had only taken 2 days by car. Despite crossing all of the Massif Central, we had progressed much faster than on the first part of our journey, where we fought the wind and were drenched by the rain. That part took us 17 days for 1,100 kilometres, but this part took us only 14 days for 1,400 kilometres.
Reflecting on this led us to the realization that it can be difficult to predict an average speed or distance you can cover on a bike. And after being on several journeys, it was easier to make comparisons and see what variables come into play. So we concluded that in future we wouldn't make any arrangements to meet people on certain dates anymore. Although we had seen so many things whilst traveling, we were a bit disappointed that we had missed out on most of Brittany. First feeling the pressure of having to arrive, and then skipping a large portion by traveling by car.
At first, we had put the blame on the weather, but we decided that if we would plan things differently, we wouldn't get into such situations. Weather can't be changed, but estimations should take bad weather into account, and what could be changed was the way we went about cycling. So, to sum this trip up, we learned 3 major lessons.
Number 1. Don't expect to be anywhere at a given date.
Number 2. There are too many variables to calculate travel speeds.
And number 3. France is an extremely diverse country and is fantastic for cycling, as the vast network of small back roads is almost inexhaustible and you never know what you will see next.
So, with this in mind, we chose a slightly different route cycling home 2 weeks later, full of surprises. And as work on the Via Rona had been progressing since we first cycled from here to Geneva 2 years earlier, we came across new sections of this impressive cycle highway, making for a very interesting trip that we would like to share with you in the next video. So, I hope you'll join us again soon.
Yes, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video just as much as I did making it. If you did, please hit the like button.
And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next one. So until then, thanks for watching
and bye-bye.